Francis Ngannou has inadvertently signed PFL's death warrant. When the PFL pried the UFC's heavyweight champion away from the octagon, they thought it would make them a legitimate threat to the sport's top promotion.
Well, I think it's a huge deal, not just for the PFL, but for the sport. I mean, he's the biggest name in MMA. It's just a beacon for other fighters to say, hey, you want to grow the sport and change the sport? This is where you can do it here at the PFL.
But oh, how they were wrong. Ngannou's contract essentially screwed the PFL, and now it's the UFC who has the last laugh.
Francis isn't a good guy. He plays the good guy. I don't understand the language, and so he seems like he's a nice guy. He's not, and he's just not a guy that I wanted to be in business with. Period. End of story.
PFL gave him equity in the company, his opponents guaranteed huge money, all while being free to compete in other sports. And when he did fight for the PFL, it was a disaster. The pay-per-view absolutely flopped and they lost almost $10 million on Ngannou alone. It was supposed to be the most successful event in PFL history, but instead, it's shown them they're nowhere near the UFC. So this is the story of how Francis Ngannou has cursed the PFL. Rewind just a few years and things looked very different. Francis Ngannou was the UFC heavyweight champion who was growing into one of the sport's biggest stars. But a huge conflict between Ngannou and the UFC was brewing under the radar. As champion, Francis Ngannou wanted more money, health insurance, and other perks from the UFC.
I have a contract that I have no leverage in that contract, no power, nobody could advocate for me. Everything that is there is what you say. And I mean, like, even when they talk you talk about extension, you decide, you're the party and the judge. You say, okay, we are extending you. I don't even have a right to fight. I don't have, and those kind of things, they put me in the position to start things like that. Right. So obviously, that's how it come out.
Dana White claimed they offered Ngannou a contract that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in UFC history, but even so, Francis declined and left for free agency.
We offered Francis a deal that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in the history of the company. More than Lesnar, more than anybody. And he turned the deal down.
It was an enormous risk. No active champion had left the UFC as a free agent since 2004. And if you looked at the MMA landscape at that time, it wasn't clear who could afford to pay Ngannou the millions of dollars he felt he deserved. There were rumors of a boxing fight with Tyson Fury, but this seemed pretty far-fetched.
Francis just thinks that he's in a position where he's got some Conor McGregor-Mayweather fight on his hands, which he does not. That fight was like a once-in-a-lifetime type deal.
A few months went by and it looked like just maybe Francis Ngannou had made a mistake until news broke of an unprecedented contract between him and an MMA organization looking to make serious waves, PFL. Francis's contract was unprecedented in MMA. He was given stake in PFL, became the chairman of PFL Africa, guaranteed a $2 million purse for his opponents, and would earn multiple times that himself. For context, he was rumored to make around $600,000 for his final UFC fight. So in short, Francis Ngannou hit the jackpot. He bet on himself and won.
Francis, listen, bro, there was so much speculation. Francis fumbling the bag. Francis doing this. Francis doing this. A couple days ago, you put a picture up of it. Hey, look, this is just me fumbling the bag in front of the Benz. And now today, it looked like your hair's longer, your skin's a little brighter. It's like everything came together for you, champ.
Although, not everyone believed it was a good deal.
It makes no sense to me. I mean, you're going to pay a guy not to fight for a year, and it's already been like 18 months. He's fought 3 times in the last 3 years. It's just not what we do here.
For the PFL, it was an enormous investment and a serious statement of their intent. They had just signed the UFC's heavyweight champion, and alongside deals with Jake Paul, Chris Cyborg, and acquiring rival promotion Bellator, it looked like PFL were inching closer to start competing with the UFC.
It is going to take years, if not decades, before anyone can gain ground, significant ground on the UFC. The UFC is by far, I don't know what rankings, this and that, most rankings that I look at, 90% of them, the top 10, if not more, 95%, whatever it is, are UFC fighters. They have the best, they put on the best events, they have the best fighters, they have the best production, they have the best everything. They are the best, they are the leaders. Anyone who tells you otherwise is an absolute liar.
For Ngannou though, there was one clause in his contract that the UFC would have never agreed to, allowing him to compete as a boxer away from the PFL umbrella. And while it seemed unlikely, somehow, some way, Francis Ngannou made an unimaginable jump.
Some big breaking news to bring you now here on Sky Sports News. It concerns the WBC heavyweight champion Tyson Fury. And his team have announced that Fury will fight former UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou at the end of October in Saudi Arabia.
While most people thought it was a pipe dream, Ngannou had landed arguably the most lucrative payday of any MMA fighter not named Conor McGregor. He was taking on, at that time, perhaps the greatest heavyweight of his era and the reigning WBC world champion, Tyson Fury. The reports claim Ngannou was earning somewhere north of $10 million, which is considerably more than he would have made in his entire UFC career. Although it was probably frustrating for PFL, who would have preferred Ngannou compete in MMA, at least his name was reaching a wider audience, which in turn hopefully would make him a bigger star when he does return. And Ngannou definitely gained a lot of new fans on his boxing debut, because in many people's eyes, he actually beat Tyson Fury despite being given very little chance prior to the fight.
I'm absolutely lost for words. I mean, Francis Ngannou has never boxed before. And fair play to him. I mean, I didn't think he was overly impressive, but Tyson Fury looked like he's never laced up a pair of gloves before. Got dropped in, was it the third round? Never threw a punch. Ngannou never threw a punch after. I thought Ngannou won by 2 rounds. The boxing world's gone mad.
But the result wasn't the end-all and be-all. Just like despite having another boxing match immediately after and losing to Anthony Joshua by knockout, Francis Ngannou still won. He made $20 million on top of the 10 from the Fury fight, money he could have never dreamed of making in the MMA, especially in his late 30s. Many believe that due to the money he made, Ngannou would retire from combat sports after the HA defeat. But in late 2024, PFL got what they wanted. They had waited a year and a half, but Francis Ngannou was finally going to compete in MMA for a promotion that wasn't the UFC.
Is Francis Ngannou right where I live?
Let's talk about Problema, a Brazilian knockout machine.
With Ngannou making his PFL debut, the promotion stacked the card and made it a rare pay-per-view. Outside of Francis challenging for their heavyweight title, they had a women's title fight featuring Chris Cyborg, a middleweight title bout, and much, much more. For the PFL, this was the biggest card in their history.
But you'll see Francis now in 2024 in PFL against La Problema, in what I believe is going to be the fight I'm looking forward to the most in the heavyweight division of all of MMA.
Will that be a pay-per-view fight?
That will be a pay-per-view fight. That fight will also have Chris Cyborg against Larissa Panchenko as the co-main fight. That fight will also have Cedric Doumbé against somebody we'll announce. So that fight is going to be big just because of Francis, but that fight will have other very compelling matchups on it.
And when the curtains closed, Francis Ngannou had won their heavyweight title, with PFL CEO Don Davis claiming the event was a huge success.
This event, by our research, beat every viewership number of every UFC event this year and was very, very close to Ring of Fire, which, it's Ring of Fire. I mean, it's the biggest boxing event in 5 years.
So when he says things like, oh, we've got the best card of the year, an investor wouldn't know any different. An investor will be impressed by that. MMA fans are not impressed by that because they know the truth. They know that that wasn't the best card of the year. Was it the best PFL card of the year? Absolutely. Was it the best MMA card of the year? Absolutely not. And they will call BS on that, and they will feel offended, and they will feel slighted, and they will feel like, no, I don't want to give you my money because this annoys me.
But days after their big show, sources were claiming it was a massive flop if the pay-per-view numbers were anything to go by. Numerous outlets were reporting the Ngannou fight had sold just 10,000 pay-per-views and earned just $500,000. For context, Ngannou vs. Miocic 2 sold $500,000. And remember, PFL paid Renan Ferreira $2 million, Ngannou $8 million, not to mention everyone else on the card. Financially, it was an epic catastrophe. Of course, they generated money elsewhere through ticket sales and adverts, but it doesn't take a financial expert to know they lost a lot of money on Francis Ngannou's debut. It was supposed to be their greatest ever event, the moment the MMA world stood up and recognized PFL as a promotion that could one day rival the UFC. But in many ways, it might have ended up being their worst. Hardly anyone watched, they lost a boatload of cash, and probably have no idea what their next move is. Because of Ngannou winning their heavyweight title, they have a huge problem on their hands. At 38 years of age, Ngannou is definitely at the tail end of his career, and whatever he does next will screw over PFL. With all the cash he's earned, he could just retire, ruining the legitimacy of their heavyweight title. There's always the chance he holds the belt hostage and tries to have another boxing fight. And even if he defends the PFL title, they have to pay him $12 million and his opponent $2 million, all while knowing it's most likely going to be a pay-per-view disaster. PFL have already lost millions on Ngannou. Surely they can't afford to do that all over again.
Praying for his demise is probably the PFL, because they signed a shitty contract with a guy that doesn't deliver any numbers in ticket sales or pay-per-views. And they got to keep paying this guy for however long, and good for him. Not good for them.
Over the years, we've seen numerous MMA promotions come in, sign a couple of the bigger names thinking fans would follow, only to end up bankrupt. With their brand, production, and amount of fighters signed, the UFC truly has a monopoly on the sport. To rival them, you'd have to either have endless cash or slowly build over years and decades. So if the PFL goes south like so many other MMA promotions, maybe, just maybe, Francis Ngannou's insane contract was the catalyst.